There is a single mason jar of kerosene sitting on the windowsill of a farmhouse in Lancaster County, next to a glass lamp with a soot-darkened chimney. Across the road, in a house that looks almost identical from the outside, a different family is opening an envelope from the power company, the kind that gets a little thicker every July when the air conditioner starts running around the clock. One household will never open an envelope like that. Not this month, not next year, not ever. The other will keep opening one every single month for the rest of their lives, watching the number climb a little higher each time the utility commission approves another rate increase. Picture both kitchens at dusk. In one, a battery-powered clock ticks on the wall, while a kerosene lamp gets carried from the counter to the table, its small flame steady and warm. The smell of it is familiar in that house as the smell of bread. In the other, a porch light flips on by itself the moment a sensor decides it is dark enough. A television murmurs in the next room, and somewhere in a basement panel, a meter spins quietly, counting up a number nobody in the house is watching, but everybody will eventually have to pay. This is not a story about people who cannot afford electricity. It never was, even though it might be easy to assume that at first glance. Some of the families who never pay a power bill are not poor at all. This is a story about a different kind of math, one that most modern homeowners were never taught, built around a piece of off-grid equipment that costs roughly the same as a month or two of an average American power bill, set up once, and then quietly works for years. It is not a secret invention. It is not a miracle box. But it is something most people have simply never been shown, because there is no shareholder anywhere who benefits from you needing it less. Think about your own relationship with electricity for a moment. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen, day and night, whether you are home or not. The air conditioner clicks on by itself when the thermostat decides it is time. You charge your phone without thinking about where that power actually comes from, what it costs per kilowatt hour, or what happens the day the grid goes down during a storm, and every single thing in your house stops working at once. The fridge, the lights, the router, the garage door, all of it. Because every part of a modern home was built assuming a live wire would always be there. You pay for that assumption every month, rain or shine, whether you used a little electricity or a lot, and the bill rarely goes down. It just goes up, a few dollars at a time, year after year, until a number that used to feel reasonable now feels like a second car payment. There is a particular kind of helplessness in that monthly envelope that most people never quite name out loud. You did not choose the rate. You did not vote on the increase. You cannot call anyone and negotiate, the way you might with a car loan or a phone plan. You simply pay it, because the alternative is no power at all. And a modern home without power is not a minor inconvenience. It is the fridge spoiling, the furnace fan dying in January, the well pump going silent if you are on a private well. That total dependency is the actual product being sold every month, far more than the electricity itself. And it is the one thing an off-grid household, even a small one, never has to feel. In many old-order Amish communities, no bill like that ever arrives. Not because electricity itself is forbidden in some flat, simple way, the way television and movies might frame it, but because of something closer to a household decision made generations ago and renewed every generation since. Do not let a wire from outside the community decide how your family lives. The specific rules, called the Ordnung, vary from one settlement to the next, and they are decided locally, district by district, not handed down from a single rule book everyone follows the same way. Some communities allow battery power for certain limited uses, others do not. What stays consistent across most of them is a deep suspicion of total dependency on something owned, billed, and controlled by an outside company, something that could be raised in price, shut off, or rationed without the household having any say in the matter at all. I want to tell you about a barn I visited a few years back, the kind with a hand-built hayloft and a row of stalls that still smelled like the morning's feeding. Up near the roofline, almost easy to miss, sat a single solar panel about the size of a card table, angled south, wired down through a small metal box to a battery the size of a car battery, sitting on a wooden shelf. The farmer who showed it to me did not call it solar power, the way a salesman would. He called it the barn battery, and he used it for exactly 3 things: a string of small LED lights strung along the rafters for evening chores, a fence charger keeping the cattle inside the pasture line, and on cold mornings, a single fan to help circulate air in the milking area. That entire setup, panel, battery, charge controller, wiring, and lights, cost him somewhere around $300 when he built it, second-hand parts and all, and it had already been running for 9 years without a single bill, a single technician visit, or a single rate increase letter in the mail. It is worth saying plainly that not every Amish settlement handles electricity the same way. A district in Lancaster County and a district in Holmes County, Ohio, can land in different places on what they allow, and a settlement in one state may permit small battery systems like that barn battery, while a stricter district 2 counties over does not allow them at all. The decisions get made locally, by the community itself, district by district, which is part of the point. Nobody outside the community is making that call for them, the way a utility commission makes a rate decision for everyone on a grid, regardless of whether they had any say in it. I also think about a grandmother's washroom I once stood in, off the back of an old kitchen, where a wringer washer sat next to a gas-powered wash machine engine bolted to its side, the kind you might mistake for something off a lawnmower. No outlet anywhere in the room. She ran that machine on a small 2-stroke motor, started by hand, the same way her mother had run it before electricity ever reached that township at all. And the same way she still ran it the week I visited, decades after most of the country had stopped thinking twice about plugging a washer into the wall. Here is the part most people misunderstand. And once you see it clearly, the rest of this makes sense. Most people assume the problem with electricity is the price. It is not really. The real problem is total dependency. A modern home is built so that every single function inside it, the lights, the fridge, the router, the furnace fan, the garage door, the phone charger, all assumes one continuous, uninterrupted, professionally maintained wire running from a power plant to your wall outlet. When that wire gets more expensive, you have no alternative path, because nothing in the house was ever designed to work without it. The old farmhouse never solved cheap electricity. It solved something more basic, not needing a continuous outside supply for every single task in the first place, and then adding small, owned, paid-for-once power only where it genuinely mattered. Let's talk about why a small setup like that barn battery actually works, in plain terms, because the science here is not complicated once someone walks you through it. A solar panel is made of a material, usually silicon, that reacts to sunlight by knocking electrons loose and pushing them through a wire as electrical current. No moving parts, no fuel, no flame. That current flows through a small device called a charge controller, which acts like a careful gatekeeper, letting power into the battery when the battery needs it, and stopping the flow once the battery is full, so the battery does not get damaged from overcharging the way an unsupervised hose left running can flood a basement. The battery itself, usually a deep cycle type built to be drained and refilled repeatedly without wearing out the way a car battery would, simply stores that electricity until you need it, day or night, sunshine or storm. The reason this matters at the household level comes down to one simple equation that almost nobody is ever taught in school. Watts equal volts multiplied by amps. That is the whole game. A small LED light might use 5 watts. A box fan might use 40. A full-size refrigerator can use anywhere from 100 to several hundred watts just to maintain temperature, and far more the moment its compressor kicks on. A small panel and battery setup can comfortably power a handful of small loads: lighting, fans, charging, a radio, a fence charger, for years on end. That same small setup cannot run a refrigerator, a window air conditioner, and a house full of modern appliances at the same time, not without scaling the panel size, battery bank, and wiring up dramatically, and the cost climbing right alongside it. The physics do not care what an advertisement promises you. A system sized for a few small loads will do those jobs forever. A system asked to do the job of your entire modern household will either fail to deliver or cost thousands of dollars to build properly, not 300. One more piece of plain science worth understanding before you buy anything. Household power in the United States runs at 120 volts of alternating current, the kind that comes out of a wall outlet, while a small solar and battery setup like this one runs at 12 volts of direct current, the same low-pressure, steady kind of power found in a car battery or a flashlight. Lower voltage is gentler and safer to work with, which is exactly why a homeowner with no electrical background can build a system like this safely in an afternoon, while household wiring at 120 volts is dangerous enough that it legally requires a licensed electrician for any real modification. If you ever want to run a normal household appliance, the kind built for a wall outlet, off a battery system like this, you would need an additional device called an inverter to convert that low, steady direct current back into the higher voltage alternating current those appliances expect, and inverters large enough to run serious appliances add real cost and complexity rather quickly. For the lighting, fans, and charging this method is built around, none of that conversion is even necessary, which is part of why it stays so simple and so cheap. So here is the exact method, the same one that Farmer walked me through, scaled for a shed, a garage, a cabin, or a backup lighting setup in a regular suburban home, not a working farm. You will need one solar panel, typically in the range of 100 to 200 watts, which usually costs somewhere between $90 and $160 depending on size and brand. You will need a charge controller rated to match your panel's output, a basic model running anywhere from $20 to $40. For the battery, a deep cycle marine battery or an AGM sealed battery in the range of 50 to 100 amp hours will run you somewhere between $80 and $150, and an AGM sealed battery is worth the small extra cost for most households because it does not require venting acid fumes the way a flooded lead-acid battery does, which matters if the battery will sit anywhere near a living space. Add wiring, an inline fuse, a battery box, and a handful of basic 12-volt LED light fixtures, and you are looking at another $40 to $60 in small parts. Add all of that together and you land right around $300 for a complete functioning off-grid power system, the same rough number that Farmer's barn battery cost him nearly a decade ago. Mount the panel somewhere it gets direct sun for most of the day, ideally facing south if you are in the northern hemisphere. Tilt it at roughly the angle of your local latitude for the best year-round exposure, though a flatter or steeper angle will still work reasonably well if your roof line does not allow for perfect positioning. Run the wiring from the panel down to the charge controller, then from the charge controller to the battery, following the wiring diagram printed with whatever controller you buy, since the exact terminal order can vary slightly between models. Connect your lights, fan, or charger to the controller's output terminals, or directly to the battery through a small fused distribution block if you are running several devices at once. Keep the battery in a ventilated space, off the ground, away from extreme heat, and somewhere it cannot be knocked over or reached by small children. That is the entire system. No monthly bill, no company, no technician visit, just sunlight, a panel, a battery, and the math you just learned. Before you build anything, sit down and add up the actual wattage of what you plan to power, because this is where most people go wrong, and it is worth slowing down on. List every device you want to run off this system and its wattage, usually printed somewhere on the device itself or in its manual. Add those numbers together, then multiply by how many hours per day you expect to actually use them, and that tells you roughly how many watt-hours you need to generate and store each day. A 100-watt panel in good sun for 5 or 6 hours a day produces somewhere around 500 watt-hours, which comfortably covers a handful of LED lights, a small fan, and daily phone charging, with a buffer left over for cloudy days. If your list includes a refrigerator or anything that runs continuously around the clock, you are no longer in $300 territory, and you should plan a much larger system, or accept that this setup will only cover part of your load, not all of it. Now the mistake that ruins this for more people than any other. Undersized wiring between the panel, controller, and battery causes what is called voltage drop, where the electricity loses strength traveling through a wire that is too thin for the distance or the current involved. The symptom looks like a system that should be working fine but somehow charges slowly, runs dim, or seems weaker than it should. The fix is simple but easy to overlook. Always use a wire gauge thick enough for both the distance and the amperage involved, which is usually printed in a simple chart included with most charge controllers and panels. And when in doubt, go one size thicker rather than thinner. A few extra dollars in wire at the start saves you weeks of wondering why your lights look dimmer than they should. A second mistake, just as common, is buying the cheapest charge controller available without checking whether it is a PWM type or an MPPT type. A PWM controller is simpler and cheaper, and it works fine for small systems like the one described here, but it is less efficient at converting the panel's full output into usable charging power, especially on cooler days. An MPPT controller costs more, often $40 to $80 instead of $20, but it squeezes more usable power out of the same panel, which matters more as your system grows larger. For a basic $300 starter setup, a PWM controller is a perfectly reasonable choice. But know the trade-off going in, instead of being confused later about why a friend's larger system seems to charge faster than yours for the same size panel. A third mistake, and a serious one, is repeatedly draining a lead-acid or AGM battery all the way down to zero before recharging it. These batteries are built to be partially drained and refilled, not run completely dead like a flashlight battery, and doing so repeatedly shortens their working life dramatically, sometimes cutting a battery that should last 5 or 6 years down to 1 or 2. Most charge controllers include a low voltage cutoff that disconnects your devices before the battery is fully drained, and it is worth confirming that feature is active, rather than assuming it is, because a battery replaced every year erases most of the savings this whole method is built around. A fourth mistake shows up outdoors, where the panel and its wiring actually live. Connections left exposed to rain, snow, and temperature swings will corrode over time, especially at the point where the panel's cable meets the wire running down to the controller. A few dollars in weatherproof connectors, a small junction box, and some basic silicone sealant at any joint exposed to the elements will save you from the slow, frustrating mystery of a system that worked perfectly all spring, and then mysteriously stopped charging the first cold, wet week of November. Check those outdoor connections once a season, the same way that farmer checked his fence line, and the system will keep working for years instead of months. I want to be completely plain about the limits here, because trust matters more than hype, and a small off-grid system like this is not a replacement for your whole home's electrical service. It will not run a refrigerator, central air conditioning, an electric stove, or a house full of modern appliances at the same time. Not at this price point, not without scaling the panel array, battery bank, and inverter up to something costing several $1,000s instead of a few hundred. This setup is also not designed to replace medical equipment, life support devices, or anything where a power interruption could be dangerous, and anyone relying on continuous power for medical reasons should work with a properly engineered backup system and a professional, not a DIY shed kit. If you ever want to connect any solar setup to your home's existing wiring to power household circuits or sell power back to the grid, that absolutely requires a licensed electrician, an inverter rated and installed to code, and approval from your local utility, since improperly connecting a power source to household wiring can cause fires, equipment damage, or serious injury, and most regions have specific legal requirements around it. What is described in this video is a standalone, low-voltage system entirely separate from your home's main wiring, used for specific small loads on its own terms, the same way that barn battery never touched the farmhouse's plumbing or its propane lines either. A few more honest safety notes worth keeping in mind. Lead-acid batteries can release a small amount of hydrogen gas while charging, so always keep them in a ventilated space, never inside a sealed closet or directly under a bed. Battery acid, in the flooded type, can cause real burns if it leaks or is mishandled, which is part of why a sealed AGM battery is worth the extra cost for most households building their first system. Always include a fuse between the battery and your wiring, sized appropriately for your wire gauge, since a short circuit on an unfused 12-volt system can still generate enough heat to start a fire, even though the voltage itself is far lower and gentler than household current. Keep the entire setup out of reach of small children, and treat the battery the same way you would treat any tool with real weight and real chemicals inside it, with basic respect rather than fear. None of this is meant to scare you away from trying it. It is meant to make sure you try it the same careful way that farmer did, treating it as a real piece of equipment rather than a toy. Now ask yourself a simple question. If a system like this is genuinely achievable for a few $100s, lasts for years, and quietly handles a meaningful chunk of an off-grid household's needs, why do so few people ever hear about it from anyone other than a hobbyist forum, or an old farmer with dirt still on his boots? The honest answer is not some hidden meeting in a boardroom somewhere deciding to suppress the idea. The honest answer is simpler and a little more uncomfortable. A power company has no reason to teach you how to need it less. There is no advertising budget behind a wiring diagram and a parts list that costs $300 once and then owes nobody anything ever again. There is an enormous advertising and infrastructure budget behind the model that bills you every single month for the rest of your life. Knowledge that does not generate a recurring invoice tends to fade quietly out of common awareness, while knowledge that does gets repeated in commercials every season. It is also worth saying that none of this knowledge was ever truly hidden in some locked drawer somewhere. The physics behind a solar panel and a battery have been sitting in libraries and hobby electronics catalogs for decades. What disappeared was not the information itself, but the everyday habit of teaching it inside ordinary households. The same way a grandmother once taught a granddaughter how to can vegetables or mend a hem, simply because nobody with a marketing budget had any reason to keep that particular kind of teaching alive. This kind of small off-grid system has uses well beyond a working farm. A backyard shed or workshop without convenient access to household wiring can run lighting and a fan on exactly this setup. A camper or travel trailer benefits enormously from the same basic panel controller battery combination for lights, charging, and a small fan, often costing far less than the built-in solar packages sold specifically for RVs. A cabin used occasionally throughout the year can stay lit and functional without running a generator every visit. A hunting cabin or a tiny home far from the nearest utility pole, the kind where running a new grid line would cost more than the structure itself, can rely on a setup like this for years of basic lighting and charging, without ever calling a utility company to extend service out that far in the first place. Even in an ordinary suburban home, a small system like this makes an excellent emergency backup for basic lighting and phone charging during a storm-related outage. The kind of outage where the rest of the neighborhood sits in the dark for hours, while one shed in the backyard quietly keeps its lights on the whole time, charged by a sun that never sent anybody a bill for using it. There is something worth sitting with here, beyond the wiring diagram and the parts list. The families who never open a power bill are not living in the past out of stubbornness. They made a decision, generations ago, and renewed every generation since, that total dependency on something they could not build, repair, or fully understand themselves was a kind of risk not worth carrying, no matter how convenient it looked from the outside. They did not reject power. They simply refused to let an outside company decide how much of it they were allowed to have, or what they had to pay to keep having it. That is not nostalgia. It is a kind of ownership that a modern household, wired entirely to a grid it has no control over, rarely gets to experience at all. There is also a quieter kind of confidence that comes with it, the kind you can hear in the way that farmer talked about his barn battery, the same plain, unhurried tone you might use describing a tool you built with your own hands, rather than a product you simply bought off a shelf. He knew exactly what was inside that metal box, exactly how the wiring ran, and exactly what to check if something ever stopped working. Most people who pay a power bill every month could not tell you a single thing about how the electricity actually reaches their wall outlet, only that it does, until the one day it does not, and then they are simply waiting for someone else to fix it. Understanding even a small piece of your own power supply changes that relationship completely. whether or not you ever disconnect from the grid at all. The lesson here is not that everyone should disconnect from the grid tomorrow, and I do not want to oversell that to you. Most modern homes are built around assumptions that make full independence expensive and complicated, and for plenty of households, staying connected to the grid remains the right and reasonable choice. But a small piece of owned, understood, paid-for-once power, sitting quietly in a shed or a barn or a garage, costing about as much as 2 months of an average electric bill, and then asking nothing further of you for years, is not a fantasy. It is sitting on a shelf in farm country right now, the same way it has for decades, waiting for anyone willing to learn the simple math behind it. If you have ever built something like this yourself, or if your family kept a setup like that barn battery running for years without anyone ever talking about it outside the family, tell me about it in the comments below, along with what part of the country you are watching from, because off-grid setups tend to look a little different, depending on the climate and the sunlight available where you live. If old, practical, self-reliant knowledge like this is useful to you, there is more of it sitting quietly in barns, cellars, and workshops. Most modern households have simply stopped looking inside, waiting for someone curious enough to open the door and take a second look.